Hello, and thanks for joining me once again on this second episode of the series Money Meets Mission, a production of AVPN in association with Tech for Impact. Our topic for discussion today is youth unemployment and the challenge of creating sustainable livelihood pathways for young people across Asia's developing countries. And a major challenge it really is. Almost 90% of the world's young people live in low-income nations, many of them here in Asia, and despite efforts to integrate them into the workforce in a positive and a productive way, unemployment rates are stubbornly increasing year on year. And of course, the pandemic has exacerbated that problem considerably. In India alone, for instance, the country has seen a 40% increase in youth unemployment just in the first half of 2021. So why are existing solutions not translating into actual jobs or improving employability? And how can we better organize funding and resources to tackle the problem? Well, my guests today have both been at the forefront of efforts to tackle youth unemployment for more than a decade. They've been working to bring creative solutions that address the brokenness within their local ecosystems. And they are Abha Thorat-Shah and Veronica Colondam. Good day to both of you, and thanks so much for joining me on this conversation.
Hi, Timur. Good to be here.
Now, Veronica is the founder and CEO at the YCAB Foundation, which is a social enterprise group based in Indonesia, and its mission is to break the generational poverty cycle using financial inclusion as an instrument to enable education. Abha is a founding member of the British Asian Trust, which was formed by a group of British Asian business leaders to tackle the widespread poverty and inequality in South Asia. Abha leads the Trust's social finance work across South Asia. You can get greater biographies and descriptions of both women's foundational work and their organizations too. The link will be in the Money Meets Mission webpage, but I'll let them give you a little better sense of how they operate and what they do and how they come to this conversation. And so, Veronica, I'll begin with you. Tell me about your engagement with youth unemployment. Tell me about how you are working to address it, and particularly the relationship between your financial approach and the problem at hand.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I mean, YCAB Foundation began 1999, that's 22 years ago, focused in the education for youth at the bottom of the pyramid. We're trying to help them come back to school, those who drop out or those going to not school, which is not good, with low quality to at least get them jobs. So that has been the mission for us, to use education for sustainability. But we've been trying so hard by creating a free school, 80 cents a month kind of school, vocational, continued study and all of that. But then they still drop out. So the question is why. They drop out from mainstream, they come to us, and they drop out again. So the issue is actually...
Your approach has been to try and break that cycle by giving them an education and putting them on a different path. But then, even that's not quite enough to break the cycle.
Not enough. It took us a decade to actually learn that there is a connection between the economic issues at home with their education, because education can be free, but going to school is never free. They incur transport and money meals and all of that. So they just can't go on going to school because of that. So then we kind of combine the economic empowerment for their mothers with the condition that they keep their kids in school. So it's that financial inclusion kind of approach to enable education. So that we kind of got that going since 2010. And we kind of see the results of it, where we can definitely from the economic perspective, we can help these mothers to leap from $2 per capita income per day to $6, which is a little bit almost aspiring middle class. By World Bank standard is 7.75 in Indonesia. So we're trying to bring them there. and we track the education of their children. The higher they go, usually the more also a better job that they can get at the end of their education, until they contribute at least $2 per capita income into the household income. So we are
All right,
actually
so a combination of
Yeah.
education and financial inclusion for the broader family
Yeah,
unit
absolutely.
to help them move out of that poverty cycle. Great, we'll get on to some of the details of how that works in a moment. Let me just give Abha a chance to tell us a little bit about the British Asia Foundation and how you see the issue of that unemployment we just mentioned in India in particular, where the problem is becoming so great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Taimur and Veronica, absolutely aligned with what you've just said. The British Asian Trust has been running since 2009, and tackling unemployment and addressing root causes of poverty are absolutely core to our work. Coming to the issue of unemployment, Taimur, you talked about the statistics of unemployment rising. The corollary of the issue is there's a huge skill shortage as well. Industry regularly says there aren't enough skilled labor to meet the jobs that they need. So on one hand, you've got unemployment, on the other hand, you've got demand. So what's going on? The trust does three things to address that. One, we focus on making sure the right financial tools are used to address the problems, so that the financial tools incentivize the right collaborations required. If industry has demand and there is supply, what's going on that can make finance enable those two to come together? Second, we really focus on what we call collaboration. One of the big issues in India is the lack of demand driven skill training program. And really driving that is at the core of our work. Third, we fund what it takes. Sometimes it could be skill training, sometimes it could be financial intervention, financial inclusion interventions, as Veronica said. Other points, it could be social and emotional learning. It doesn't matter what. At the end of the day, it's about joining up all the dots to address, which is clearly a misalignment issue in the sector and not working. It's not there aren't enough people or there aren't enough jobs. It's about getting both of those to work together.
So both of you, are focusing in the initial instance on the financial aspect of bringing some kind of sense, I suppose, and inclusion to the problem. But both of you have also highlighted the fact that it's a much deeper problem than simply getting finance. The question, I suppose, as you put it, Abha, is joining the dots. So tell me a little bit about how that process works. I mean, what have you, during the course of your work, found about what works when trying to join those dots?
Sure, I'm happy. I'm happy to tell you how we approach it, Taimur. Where we start is what is the outcome we want to have. If we want to keep someone in a job, not just give them a job, keep them in a job for 6 months, the outcome is clear for us. So we define our goals and then we finance and incentivize on that basis. We talk to employers to find out what doesn't keep people in jobs and then work backwards from that. At the core of our social finance work is a drive towards funding outcomes over outputs. So, for example, we won't fund a training program. We will fund the fact we will pay for the intervention once the person has been in the job. By changing financial incentives, we find that all the little inputs and all the steps taken for that sort themselves out, and industry is able to change and pivot its program as required. The minute you just fund inputs, you make it you commit yourself to the sort of units of things funded as against the kind of outcome you have. So the real focus of our work is funding outcomes, and we find that's sort of like a magical moment where all things and all the dots start aligning towards the end goal that we are meeting.
It's an interesting distinction, or at least an interesting specific function, funding the outcomes. And I'm wondering what that means in terms of it. It seems like you're specifically saying it's a contrarian position almost to what other people look at it. Is that the case? I mean, are you doing something different to the way the other people do it? Do they fund other things?
A great question. I don't think it's different. I just think it's an evolution. Outcomes are always seen as being nebulous and difficult to achieve. We are at the forefront with several other funders. We aren't alone in this move. The Michael and Susan Dell Foundations, Children's Investment Fund, UBS Optimus. Several people have been we've been talking to each other for some years and saying, if we've been funding inputs and nothing's changing, by changing the incentives, can we change the sector? And yes, we are doing something different, but it's not absolute, it's not brand new in that respect. People have been trying for some time. The complexity is there is a risk in funding an outcome, because what you pay for is activity usually. How does activity get paid for? And we needed to find solutions for activity to get paid for so we could focus on outcomes. And that's where we use investor capital to do that. so that eventually a government pays for an outcome or a philanthropist pays for an outcome.
And Veronica, I suppose what this adds up to is really trying to reconcile the funding and the KPIs that are expected by the funders and the outcomes, as Abha puts it. I mean, how do you approach the management of expectations and the measurement of outcomes?
Yeah. For us, we simplify the outcome in terms of the increase of income that we track over time. So that's probably the most important component, because we assume that the better income the mothers have, they will have more ability to keep their kids in school and provide better food on the table and savings. That's on the mother side. That's the financial empowerment side. On the education side, keeping the kids in school, I mean, it is harder with COVID, with all this access to technology and internet quota and all of that. But we've managed to keep them in school, and we changed slightly our approach from setting up like a physical school to definitely online school. But we also approach the through a scholarship kind of system. It's way cheaper for us to do that, and instead of to set up a school. So I'm glad with the COVID in terms of, you know, giving us the direction how to do this. So, but that's from the program side. Throughout time, YCAP also set up as a venture. So we have a venture company that kind of invests in other, well, not the ultra micro level, but the SME level businesses run by women. And we actually invest in young women under 35 in very promising businesses. So it has to have, I think, few layers at play. Where, yes, we're addressing the ultra micro, but we need to empower the SME that definitely work with the ultra micro women. So this is Women for Women kind of program. And we launched this with AVP and the Indonesian Women Empowerment Fund last year. So this is just a kind of a beginning for us, but we are exciting with looking at the model that women empower women, a better sort of like SME empowered the ultra micro level.
And tell me about the financing process, though. I mean, we're talking about money meeting mission. When you are raising money for these processes and for these solutions, how do you frame that conversation, and how do you convince them that their money is working properly? Do you find that they have a different perspective on these things?
Well, we have to agree before we start the conversation with them that we have the agreement in what KPIs look like, what success looks like for them. But of course, in the case of YCAP, we are a social enterprise, so the foundation can definitely take philanthropic money and the company can take investment money. So there's two different conversation at the table, speaking with impact investors and speaking with grant making organizations or CSR companies. CSR companies tend to be quite, in a way, kinder, more patient, because it's a philanthropic money. But investors, they want everything. They want the financial return. They want the impact. But we kind of simplify that part on the impact side, that we agree on the increase of income would be the key to success to the program in terms of economic empowerment. So we keep it simple, and it's a different conversation for giver and investors. Yeah.
You mentioned the gender issue there, and you're very active in that perspective. Tell me a little bit more about how you are approaching gender in this context. Is there a difference in youth unemployment between the genders?
With Indonesia, I don't know India, I'm sure similar data. I mean, our domestic product, the brutto domestic product, is around $1 trillion. So about almost 70% is actually backed up by the SMEs, and 80% as SME are women. If you look at the data, majority of them under 45. So youth okay, not so youthful, but I see the trend in our group, the women that we work with. Currently, around 50,000 families that women that we work with. We look at the ability to access technology as part of their doing business, daily business, and it has increased since the pandemic, because it is not by choice that they want to be savvy. They kind of have to if they want to survive. So that's what I think promising, and women are really big in this pie of a job creation. I think not only that they themselves, but then when they're empowered, they're able to hire their probably neighbor, their relatives, to help them with the business. So we look at it as also job creation when they are women entrepreneurs, even at that bottom of the pyramid. Yeah.
How does the gender issue fit into your calculus? What about the role of women in general, and how do you define mission with men and women in mind?
So first, let's just look at the stark numbers, Taimur. 47% of women lost their jobs, as against 7% of men in the pandemic in India. That itself tells you about the sort of huge impact of the pandemic on women. On the other hand, the pandemic gave us an opportunity to reimagine how women can be in the workplace. Taimur. Women can work from home now using digital technologies. They can run businesses and sell wares using mobile technologies. So in India, we saw a flowering of ideas because of the pandemic. Unfortunately, bad events also teach us how to come out of it, hopefully. But we also saw that the huge impact, the biggest and the largest impact was on women. So finance and mission can come together by doing a couple of things. First is addressing the barriers. Can technology, for example, enable us to really address the barriers? Barriers of women having to go to the workplace, faced violence on the way. Is technology one way of doing that? Secondly, really, are we programmatically financing those barriers? Secondly, of course, by whole outcomes mantra, are we financing the right outcomes? And that's where, when you're talking to givers, you asked Veronica a minute ago, what's the challenge with giving? The challenge with giving is every buyer is buying a different outcome. And collaborating on the same currency of outcome, we often use the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals as our currency, is a huge part of the buying conundrum. And if we can get people onto that same page and say we're buying the same thing, you suddenly have this moment where the world is buying,
sorry to interrupt
buying
there, but
together,
that's a
buying
big if and a really
collectively, and therefore buying
important if.
bigger.
Tell me where
And
that
that
conversation is right now. Are you anywhere near being able to bring everybody together on that same platform?
it's always complicated. Somebody wants to buy a learning outcome, someone wants to keep a child in school. Eventually, it's a question of where the market is and whether you can go back to what we say, what is enshrined in the SDGs. The simplest currency for us is what has been, what the world has agreed is the outcome we need to be purchasing. The complexity is what is the unit of measurement on that. And there's a lot of brilliant people working on that, far better than me. In women's cases, while employment and income might be one intermediate outcome, actually many gender activists would tell you it is about when a woman has a baby, or when she's able to say no to violence in the household, or make financial decisions for buying property. Now those are the outcomes you're aiming for. You may not be able to measure them. What you can measure is what Veronica is saying. You can measure income increase. You can measure employment, staying in a job, and an employer being creating a conducive workplace. Those become intermediate places. So it is a journey and not a destination in one shot.
What
So the
about
goals,
the variable of countries and cultures and governments and regulations? Veronica, you're principally based out of Indonesia, but you're also operating in a number of other Southeast Asian countries. How do you find the differences in the different environments? And are the challenges different, or are they much the same?
Absolutely. I mean, India and Indonesia, we share a very regulated, I think, charitable world, philanthropic. We are probably the two nations who do not give tax deduction, for example, to our donors. So that's actually really will screen, the type of givers that will be attracted to support us. But I guess we are navigating our ways. That's why the kind of social enterprise in Indonesia, when you talk about structure, is in no existence. There's no such a thing as for example, CIC in the UK. But we just have to navigate between having a two structure, the non-profit foundation and the for-profit, which is company. And it's just a management group type of thing that we have to be really careful in how we do our books, because both got audited, and that's very sensitive in our case, because of the both get tax. I guess the tax are not quite friendly to a social enterprise. Not yet. I'm on the road to change that, but it will take time. Yeah.
It's not just a matter of the regulatory system and the taxation laws and stuff like that, though, Abha. What about the cultural element? What about the way the labour market itself is organised and how the infrastructure of these activities is created? What are those elements like?
Absolutely. Let me first talk to you about enabling regulation and then come back to the structural challenges. The main regulatory opening up that happened in India was when they passed the CSR regulation, and they made it mandatory for government, for all corporates, to give 2% of their profits, I think it is, towards development activities. That created a sort of energy in the development sector that nothing else has. So there is good regulation as well, and India has been at the forefront of that CSR regulation. Similarly, the activity I see in the grassroots of social entrepreneurship in India is also second to none. I see better ideas out of there than any other place that I've ever worked in. And of course, I would say that as an Indian, but genuinely, there is a flowering of enabling conditions that allows that. Third, the government is open to private sector participation. While it's complex, it's opening its doors to working collaboratively with the private sector, philanthropic and other places, on large development challenges, recognizing that nobody can go at it alone. So that's sort of the regulatory environment. There are challenges, but there are opportunities. In terms of the structural barriers in the sector that we're talking about, unemployment, I think we've discussed this earlier, 90% of people employed are in the informal sectors in India. And that itself creates a structural barrier of addressing the needs of those millions over there. And with that, you can only do that with the government, because the government has its tentacles everywhere. And working on innovative programming for those organizations, selecting your outcomes jointly with government and saying, here's what we're incentivizing for, is the only way forward.
Veronica, you were talking a lot about helping the individuals involved, getting them into school, helping their social and community situation to enable the broader infrastructure of support. But what about from the job market perspective itself? What about creating more employment opportunities? What about a system and as Abha was talking about, the employment infrastructure that exists? Are there issues that are particularly problematic within those contexts?
Yeah, I think COVID just make it all problem exponentially, bigger than what it is. We had the opportunity. It's just an example of a kind of investee that we are investing in. It's a job portal. So pre-COVID, we came in. They had around 1 million user. During COVID, the demand for jobs increased 11 times. So because of course a lot of people lost their jobs, and with the work from home kind of approach, only limited numbers of employees can maintain their jobs. So we see that demands just increase, and in the job portal that we invest in, we focus on those without university degrees. So you can actually see the numbers of people with very low education looking for a kind of job. And our user profile is definitely under 30. And yes, the youth unemployment is real issue for Indonesia. And I think education, unfortunately, it's a long-term kind of activity, but that is the only hope to change this. Because in one of our vocational center, the batik making class, it just kept on running during COVID and kept creating jobs. I don't know, compared to salon and weaving and sewing classes, the batik is very resilient. Maybe because there's a cultural element to it. But what I like about it best, we invest in the education for like only short time, 4 to 5 months, and yet our students able to create batik and to sell, and they can actually make 5 to 7 times the minimum wage in that area, and they become able to create jobs, because batik by its nature, you can't make it yourself. You have to make it as a group. So the group effort, I think collaboration, I think that word keep coming back. Abha has been saying it, collaboration at the top level, regulators, and ourselves as implementer, of course, collaborator between givers, philanthropic givers, or investors, impact investors to the mission. This is all money meets mission. And at the very bottom, actually collaboration of between the kind of industry. I think this is very niche, but I see the potential very resilient throughout COVID. And this is a job creating vocation that we think is very promising.
So we've been talking a lot about, I guess, the difficulties and the complexities of the environment, and making the connection between not just the money and the mission, but all those different elements and points of influence that Abha was talking about. Let's talk about what you have learned from your decades of experience in trying to reconcile that complexity. Abha, obviously there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to the problems of employability, given everything that you said so far. But are there basic lessons, are there basic rules, I guess, of engagement that you have come across that you think are worth maintaining every time you come to a new project?
Sure. Taimur, the question is like asking a parent whether there are rules of parenting that work. And the answer is no. But then you learn along the way, and there is wisdom, and the wisdom deepens. I'll tell you a small story for a second, if I may. Many years ago, in a village, there was a farmer who was working in the field I was visiting. His son, on the other hand, was sitting at the doorstep and sitting around. And I said to him, "There's your old father. He's working. What's going on with you?" He said, "Well, I'm educated. I don't do that kind of job anymore, but there's no job for me." So his aspiration after education was for a better or a proper job as against the job his father did. There's a lesson I learned there, Taimur, that as we educate and skill and enable, we have to recognize we're talking about human beings and their aspirations. And underneath all this design is a person who desires for a different life. A woman who's employable or skilled or trained, maybe going back into her household and having to deal with the dynamics as well. And if I keep coming back to that young boy who was sitting there as his father labored and felt he was too good to be laboring like that anymore, I will always keep myself honest and straight. And I think as parenting, that's the only truth. In so many years, I tell myself, think about that young man. Am I actually enabling or disenabling him?
But that reality applies to almost every single country in the world, doesn't it? I mean, no one in any country, be it very developed or very undeveloped, is going to want to do the really boring, horrible, menial tasks. Is that?
I'm in the UK, Taimur. We don't have people getting our food to our supermarkets right now. Right?
So what is the answer to that? I mean, what did you tell to that boy, and how can you address an issue where, on the one hand, you've got this really positive development where the youth are coming in with an education, an expectation, an ambition that exceeds those of their parents, and yet they're not working.
It's the dignity of labor. I think for me, the underlying piece on this is there is dignity in labor. And when I see a partner on the field who really takes the dignity of labor, I still remember a brilliant agriculture partner of ours talking about goat insemination and saying that she was making it cool for young women to be getting goats, making sure there's goat rearing going on. But she made it a cool job. She put it in the press. She sorted it out. There is something about the dignity of labor. Veronica talked about batik, which changes the dynamics of how the next generation looks at it. Some things are always going to be uncool, Taimur. The youth are the youth. You can't change that. But if we can generally believe that every bit of the labor market is dignified, and we see that every activity has that dignity, I think we will work with those partners who get the problem with all the jargon on one side.
How about you, Veronica? Are there reliable strategies, tools, techniques, attitudes that you have come across during your work that you can think, okay, this is our general approach?
Yeah, I learned that we have to manage our expectation and have that mental readiness, because anything can go wrong, really, without, of course, a proper communications with the target group that we want to reach. Sometimes what works for us, what is good for us, is not good and does not work for them. So I think we need to have that need assessment really addressed, because it's very important. So we are responding to what they need in that particular area. So communications for me. Number two, definitely collaboration at every level, because it's not just collaboration for money, but collaboration for support. I mean, to get your program, no matter how good it is, if the community there, the leaders of the community don't like you, you're done, you're gone. So that is very important. You have to have that. In Indonesia, we call it socialization. We socialize what we do and get the buyout from them. The support, that's very important. And I think at the end of the day, I did mention about managing our own readiness. I think we have to deal with the mindset. I think Abha said a little bit about that in the beginning, that we can only at the end of the day help those who want to help themselves. We cannot force, the way of what we think is good for them. They have to want to fight it. So I think the fighting spirit, we need to get from them. Without it, there's no change, no development can happen. So that's what I think. And I think that mindset, Timur, is the biggest challenge for our students. They come from a very poor background. For them to be in the workplace, to be able to actually say something to their superior, it takes a lot. So that work readiness training that we give them at the end of their education, very important. The way they, for example, giving a CV and then shake the hands, and have that confidence, little things like that, they just don't know how to do.
Let's look at the same question from a different perspective. We're viewing this situation from the perspective of the situation on the ground. Let's turn the lens around for a minute, Abha, and look at where the money is coming from. Let's look at the funders themselves, the donors themselves, where you're getting the finances from. You work with a lot of givers. What are the lessons and the messages that you would like to share with respect to that relationship and that collaboration? And how can we use those relationships and the money itself, the tools and the channels of the money itself, to help to improve the situation that we're in?
The lesson is the same, I think. Eventually, focus on the goal, not the steps to the goal. The first bit is about givers. Givers are also facing their own challenges. Aid budgets are lower than they've ever been. My colleagues at the FCDO are more stressed today in the UK, which is the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, because their budgets are lower than ever before. They're having to make choices today as they face the huge problems in Afghanistan and in Syria, in post-COVID. I think givers are as vulnerable and as affected by the pandemic as the person on the ground, maybe in a different way, but their entire way of doing development has been challenged in the last so many months. And as they come out of it, I think my only lesson to them is to keep it straight, to focus on the outcomes. I've said that before, to work with others, to not sweat the detail, because there's a big, huge problem. We are back on many stats. More people have gone into poverty. And 5 is that if there are good solutions and if there is an entrepreneur, trust them and just really go with them. Because eventually for scale, you need to trust the person on the street, the person doing the work. You can have all the stuff, but if that doesn't work, that the programs don't work.
Obviously, there is an enormous call on those givers for funds, and often that might be a stress on them. But what about a situation where givers do have funds, and perhaps the meeting of their expectations and the projects that they're being offered. Maybe there's an imbalance between them. Veronica, I mean, have you come across problems where you are just simply not able to cross the gap between the existence of money and the project that needs money?
Well, I think luckily we've been filling the gaps, or I guess usually we're already pre-screened by our donors or givers. So they kind of have that mission alignment from the beginning. That's very important. And of course, you cannot cheat on time. You know, being present for a long time kind of give that also trust. So, well, I think what I learned from working with funders and givers is just how we have to deliver what we promise. And
You're saying that there isn't actually ever a problem where there isn't an appropriate project to be funded, because that's where I was coming from on this. I mean, in a lot of cases, what you do have, particularly in the sustainability world, you do have a lot of venture capitalists coming in and saying, well, we have money, but the projects that you're offering us simply don't meet our criteria.
Yeah, I think when that happens, Taimur, it is to ask what is your criteria too high at a time of complexity. And I think that would be my first question is, are you trying to get to your aim of the best possible investment and ticking every box in 1 minute? Are you saying, here's my journey? And in journey one, step one, I might compromise on 3 things, but in 2 years I'll be there because currently the product doesn't exist what I want to do. So I think I'm happy to be gently challenging on that while trying to sort the system out as well.
Okay, we talked, I mentioned there for a minute sustainability, and I just want to bring in the issue of the climate, sustainability, the SDGs, CSR in a corporate context. These elements are becoming a major part of the conversation. I'm wondering to what extent they impact not only the givers on your side and whether it's feeding into the source of funds and potential funds for you guys, or if it's not even relevant in the context of the youth unemployment conversation.
No, it's very, very relevant. I mean, the gender lens is big on youth unemployment for us because I guess naturally, since we work with mothers, economic empowerment, so the SDGs became very relevant. But yes, and the climate change part, maybe we're not so much into that. Our donors, our givers, they kind of pre-screen us and they kind of know the kind of SDGs that they want to work together, to deliver together with White Cap.
Abha, from your perspective, is the landscape, the challenge that you've been facing, particularly changing in the modern day, or are the problems fairly consistent?
The problems remain consistent. The landscape is changing. You cannot ignore the climate, Taimur, if today, as any person who works in the sector. And yes, I'll come to unemployment in a minute. Secondly, as we see second generation givers, because we work with many diaspora family foundations, younger people will not ignore climate in their giving. So it is definitely one of the trends of the future. I mean, if I talk to my own children, they'd rather fund the oceans than they would fund a poverty program, which I often argue with them about. So you are seeing a trend and change, and it is coming, and we've got to be prepared for it. In the sector that we're discussing, green jobs is definitely on the conversation with several donors. We are understanding how sustainable jobs can be there. It's not about any job, it's about how that job is sustainable as well. And that discussion, I'm seeing an evolution in that. It happens, and as societies move, as as problems become more layered with and interconnections. With climate, you see refugee problems. With refugee problems, you see unemployment. And these are all linked to each other. Those linkages can be made, especially with unemployment. You can see in Bangladesh, we often see that link. And there's some brilliant work that can be addressing both those issues together. Absolutely. The givers push us to think beyond our layer one problems and finding solutions as well.
It's not just a cultural question and not just a flavor of the month question, I suppose. Is there actually a significant impact from these new ideas? Where are the existing models of funding the kind of work that you do being impacted?
SDGs have been around for some time, Taimur, so there's nothing new there. We are committed to them. If anything, we've gone backwards on them in the last 18 months or so. So the commitment to SDGs has been in the sector for a long time. CSR has had huge positive trends for India, the Indian giving context, definitely. The question of green financing is going to change things. I don't think it's changed it to the extent that we're going to be able to see in India. So I think to your question, a couple of those challenges we've dealt, and a couple of those opportunities have been presenting good finance and new finance in a long way. The other thing which I worry about is as challenges become more complex, how do givers prioritize within that? How do they make sure they don't forget some of the quieter issues, child poverty, child protection, those sorts of issues that sit under this, and it doesn't move like the wind as fashionable causes sometimes do. And when you work for many years, you see causes coming in and out of fashion, and hopefully that doesn't happen, and we continue to stay, to our the core requirement as well in the development conversation.
All right, fantastic. Well, look, we've covered a lot of ground, and thank you so much for your input. Let's finish off with sort of a positive look forward. We began by talking about how the unemployment problem has not only not gone away, it's become worse. And of course, fingers crossed, there will come a time when the pandemic side of that problem begins to fade away. But we still have the systemic side of that problem. Give me some hope, both of you, if you would, that we are on a path, a trajectory towards being able to dig into that problem and eat away at the size of the problem.
Yeah, I'm an optimist, Timur. So it's always positive note coming from me. I mean, with the use of technology, the way it penetrates the bottom of the pyramid layers, we can definitely deliver better and stronger program for them to help them, digitally. I guess all what we've done so far in COVID time, it's been all successful in the sense that it's actually cheaper to to embrace this community. So technology is definitely hopeful very much for me in order to touch the lives of those at the bottom of the pyramid. And of course, the ESG rating for companies in Indonesia, they start with energy companies and how I think what Abha said, it really encouraged this whole development world and plus the generation, the Gen Z, they don't want anything to they don't want to do anything without impact. So very hopeful for me. It's a bright light at the end of the tunnel.
I'm not sure what gen we're up to these days, and I think we're running out of classifications for each subsequent generation. But Abha, let's finish off with your thoughts on what the gen next is going to be facing, and whether we are making progress towards the goal of solving the unemployment issue in the developing world.
I think my answer is a sort of middle ground. I wish I was as much of an optimist as Veronica, but I am. Sometimes, not always. But systemic solutions have always existed there. What we have today, I think, with climate and the pandemic are burning platforms. We have to act now and do it quick and put things aside and differences aside to do it. Solutions have always been there. It's about saying, is it really working? India has some of the best laws in the world. It's about making sure they work. And to my mind, what these two burning platforms do is make it a problem of today and make it a problem of now. And if we can embrace that, I'm an optimist.
Fantastic. Well, once again, thank you both for your thoughts and your contributions today. It's been great talking to you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Timur, for your brilliant questions.
Thank you, Timur. Thank you, Abha. Have a great week.
And that ends this episode of Money Meets Mission. Do join us again for the next one soon. Thanks and bye-bye.